All right, so our viewers at home, I want you to imagine it's the 2024 election night, and the 47th president of the United States is about to be announced. And we see this clown again. Yeah, look at it. It's frightening. But we really could be on the road to Trump 2.0 if Republicans snatch back control of Congress during the midterm elections. And that's what we're looking at, folks. Up for grabs in the Senate, 14 Democrat-held seats and 21 Republican. If just one seat flips red, the scale would tip in favor of the GOP. And listen, if Republicans take control of both chambers, election reform would die. Anti-abortion efforts would be venerated. And CRT bans, which isn't taught in any school anywhere, by the way, could become the law of the land. But here's this. Also, DOA, any attempts by Congress to hold Trump accountable. So say bye-bye to the January 6th investigating committee. Joining me now to talk about all of this is an all-star panel, MSNBC political analyst and Democratic pollster, and my friend Fernand Amandi, Democratic pollster Terrence Woodbury. Hi there, Terrence. And longtime cross-connection guest, political strategist Lucy Caldwell. Thank you guys all for being here. Fernand, I want to start with you because you and I had a very panic call this week talking about what could happen this mid-election season. Voters typically underperform when it comes to midterm elections. During the Trump administration, though, we saw an increase. Voter turnout went up among all voting age and racial and ethnic groups. 53% of the voting age population voted in 2018. That was the highest midterm turnout in 4 decades, while the 2014 election had the lowest. So I'm just curious your thoughts. What's the expectation this year, just in terms of voter participation?
Well, Tiffany, you're right. That 2018 midterm turnout was the highest in recent memory, and there was good reason for it to be so because, very honestly, democracy was on the ballot in that election. You can just imagine what would have happened had the Republicans held on to the control of the Congress and the Senate going into the 2020 election. Their efforts to overturn that election might have been even more successful. There certainly would be no January 6th committee. And I think what Democrats and the country realized in 2018 was that it was the most important election in American history. That repeated itself in 2020. And guess what? It's going to be the case again in 2022 and for the foreseeable. Every election that takes place in this country for the short term, given the tack that the Republicans have taken, which is an anti-democracy authoritarianism party, means, Tiffany, that there needs to be that sense of concern and that sense of mobilization, because it's true. We've seen this party become radicalized. We've seen this party completely become unfit for the mainstream and untethered from democracy. And if you turn control of this government over to the Republicans, you are turning over the democracy. Simple as that.
Yeah, and we really need to make that point to American voters out there because people are exhausted. And Terrence, I've looked at a lot of the data that Hit Strategies keeps in my inbox. You talk to a lot of younger voters, but you also talk to voters across the spectrum. Do you feel that sense of urgency from voters this time around? Or are people like just exhausted and wipe the sweat from their brow and they're not planning to participate? What's your take?
That's exactly right, Tiffany. Morale is extremely low amongst the Democratic coalition. We are seeing cynicism and frustration with the perceived lack of progress on the progressive agenda. And the truth is, Democrats have made significant progress on issues that are most important to the Democratic base, but they are not telling that story. And so, a part of what we have to do here in the midterm is portray a message of unfinished business. And there's two sides of that. A part of that unfinished business is that we have to put Trump back on the ballot, right? That the multiracial coalition, that surge that you spoke of in 2018 and that came back out in 2020, what united that surge was an anti-MAGA, anti-Trump, anti-racism sentiment that really started to bubble up in the summer of 2020. We have to put Trump back on the ballot, but that does not mean that we get to make every Republican seem like Trump. It means that we have to literally explain that if Republicans win the House and the Senate in 2022, they will reinstall Trump in 2024.
I think that's a really good point, Terrence and Lucy. Love having you here as somebody who's formerly a member of the Republican Party. I want you to take a listen because Terrence talked about, a morale issue with Democratic voters. I do not see that same morale issue across the aisle. Republicans seem fired up because of messages like this. Take a listen to Republican Governor Kay Ivey in a new political ad. Take a listen.
If Joe Biden keeps shipping illegal immigrants into our states, we all gonna have to learn Spanish. My message to Biden, no way, Jose. That's why I sent National Guard troops to protect the southern border. And that's why we banned sanctuary cities in Alabama. The left can try to counsel me, I don't care. But here in Alabama, we're gonna enforce the law.
Again, we saw themes of this same thing in 2016. We saw themes of the same thing during the Reagan administration. We saw themes of the same thing during the Nixon administration, Lucy. So for people who are still voting Republican, what's driving them to the polls? It seems like, yet again, xenophobia, racism, sexism, and all the other isms. What's your take?
Yeah, I certainly think that it's white grievance, and that's a huge problem. And that's not a particularly helpful or exciting answer, because what do you do about white grievance? I think that one of the biggest challenges that Democrats have right now is that they're failing to grab some of those folks in the middle. And that's for a couple of reasons. One of them is that the kind of traditional turnout that we think of campaigns needing to do is actually happening at the polls, right? Polls as in the extremes, right? So Republicans are trying to make sure that their newly minted hardcore MAGA heads are still going to turn out for them, right? You saw that kind of question in races like the Virginia gubernatorial, right? Could Glenn Youngkin thread the needle of seeming like he was distancing himself from Trump, but still turning out the far right? And the answer was he did, right? Democrats also have that issue, and this has been alluded to in the last couple of minutes. A lot of voters who have come out for Democrats think, well, what have you done for me lately? And so I think it's really, really critical. We're not going to reach the Kay Ivey supporters of the world. We're not going to reach these dog whistle followers, but Democrats certainly, unfortunately, have to take the moral high ground and figure out what are the issues that are going to activate some of these people. It is unfortunately not really democracy, right? And you start to see some interesting wedges when you look even at polling of Republican primary candidates, or voters rather. You can see that these Republican primary voters who don't believe that Joe Biden won the 2020 election also want to have like a minimum wage increase, right? A policy reform that Republicans are never going to give them. So that's a moment and an opportunity for Democrats to try to grab back some of those folks.